The Vanishing Hitchhiker. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, dancing shadows across the winding country road, I found myself alone, miles from the nearest town. My car, a vintage Mustang, had developed a persistent cough, forcing me to pull over. The fading light painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, creating a surreal atmosphere. A shiver ran down my spine as I stepped out of the car. The silence was broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. Just as I was about to call roadside assistance, I heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching. Peering into the twilight, I saw a figure walking towards me. It was a young woman, her long, flowing hair illuminated by the headlights of my car. "Can I give you a ride?" I offered. She nodded, her face a mask of gratitude. As she climbed into the passenger seat, I noticed a strange, almost ethereal quality about her. Her eyes seemed to hold a world of secrets, and her voice was soft and melodic. As we drove, she told me her name was Sarah. She was on her way to visit her grandmother, who lived in a small village nearby. As we talked, I felt a strange sense of familiarity with her, as if we had known each other for years. Suddenly, Sarah pointed to a small, secluded cottage nestled among the trees. "That's my grandmother's house," she said. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the cottage was eerily silent. There were no lights on, and the door was ajar. "I'll be right back," Sarah said, stepping out of the car. As she disappeared into the cottage, I felt a strange sense of unease. A cold wind swept through the car, and I shivered involuntarily. When Sarah returned, her face was pale and her eyes were wide with fear. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "My grandmother isn't here." Before I could ask her what she meant, Sarah was gone. I jumped out of the car and ran into the cottage. The place was empty. There were no signs of struggle, and the only thing that was out of place was a single, withered rose lying on the floor. As I stood there, frozen in disbelief, I heard a faint sound coming from outside. I rushed to the door and peered out into the darkness. The road was empty, and there was no sign of Sarah. The only thing that remained was the memory of a ghostly figure and a chilling encounter with the unknown. The following week, I returned to the scene of the encounter, hoping to find answers. As I drove down the winding country road, a sense of dread washed over me. The once tranquil landscape now seemed eerie and foreboding. I pulled over at the spot where I had picked up Sarah. The cottage was still empty, its windows dark and lifeless. As I stood there, lost in thought, I heard a faint rustling in the bushes. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned to look. Emerging from the undergrowth was a figure that sent a chill down my spine. It was Sarah, looking exactly as she had the night of the encounter. But something was different. Her eyes were filled with a haunting sadness, and her skin seemed almost translucent. "You came back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sarah," I stammered. "What happened that night?" She sighed, her voice filled with a heavy weight. "I'm not really Sarah. I'm a ghost, bound to this place by a tragic love story." She went on to tell me that centuries ago, a young woman named Sarah had lived in the cottage. She had fallen deeply in love with a local farmer, but their love was forbidden by their families. Heartbroken, Sarah had taken her own life on the night of their planned elopement. Her ghost had been trapped in the cottage ever since, doomed to wander the countryside in search of her lost love. "I've been appearing to travelers in the hopes that one of them might be able to help me find peace," Sarah explained. "But so far, no one has been able to see me for who I truly am." As Sarah's story unfolded, I felt a deep sense of compassion for her. She was a lost soul, trapped in a timeless limbo. I knew that I had to help her. "I'll do whatever I can to help you find peace, Sarah," I promised. With a grateful smile, Sarah thanked me. As I turned to leave, I glanced back at the cottage. A single tear rolled down Sarah's cheek. I knew that our paths would never cross again, but I would never forget the haunting encounter with the vanishing hitchhiker. Determined to help Sarah find peace, I began researching the history of the region. I discovered that there was indeed a tragic love story involving a young woman named Sarah who had lived in the cottage centuries ago. Her tale matched the story Sarah had told me. Armed with this new information, I returned to the cottage. As I approached, I felt a strange energy surrounding the place. It was as if the cottage was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stepped inside and called out Sarah's name. To my surprise, she appeared before me. Her face was filled with hope, and her eyes sparkled with anticipation. "I've found something," I said, handing her a copy of the historical document. Sarah's eyes widened as she read the story. Tears streamed down her face as she realized that her love story was finally recognized. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I can finally rest." With a final glance around the cottage, Sarah faded away, leaving behind a sense of peace and tranquility. As I stepped outside, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had helped a lost soul find rest, and in doing so, I had reaffirmed my belief in the power of compassion and hope. The encounter with Sarah had a profound impact on me. It had opened my eyes to the unseen world, the realm of ghosts and spirits. From that day forward, I became more attuned to the subtle energies that surrounded me. I began to explore the paranormal world, delving into the stories of haunted places and unexplained phenomena. I even joined a local ghost hunting group, hoping to uncover more mysteries like the one I had experienced with Sarah. One evening, while investigating an abandoned asylum, I felt a strange presence watching me. I turned around, but there was nothing there. A chill ran down my spine as I realized that I was not alone. I closed my eyes and tried to focus on the energy. Slowly, a faint image began to form. It was a woman, dressed in the attire of a nurse. She was standing behind me, her eyes filled with sadness. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The woman turned to face me. Her face was etched with sorrow, and her eyes held a world of pain. "My name is Eleanor," she replied. "I worked here for many years." Eleanor told me that she had witnessed terrible things during her time at the asylum. She had seen patients mistreated, tortured, and even killed. The trauma had been too much for her to bear, and she had taken her own life. "I'm trapped here," she said, her voice filled with despair. "I can't find peace." I knew that I had to help Eleanor. I promised her that I would do everything in my power to free her from her ghostly prison. Over the next few weeks, I conducted extensive research on the asylum. I discovered that it had a dark history, filled with tales of abuse and neglect. It was no wonder that Eleanor's spirit was still lingering there. With the help of a local psychic, I was able to contact Eleanor and guide her towards the light. As she passed on, I felt a sense of relief and peace. I had helped another lost soul find rest, and in doing so, I had reaffirmed my belief in the power of compassion and hope. The encounter with Eleanor was just one of many paranormal experiences I would have in the years to come. Each encounter brought me closer to understanding the mysteries of the unseen world and the power of the human spirit. The following year, I found myself back at the cottage where I had first met Sarah. It had been decades since our last encounter, and I was curious to see if the place still held any paranormal energy. As I approached the cottage, I felt a strange sense of unease. It was as if something was watching me. I glanced around, but there was no one in sight. Bracing myself, I stepped inside. The cottage was still there, its interior unchanged. Dust covered the furniture, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. As I wandered through the rooms, I felt a cold draft blowing through the hallway. I followed the draft to the attic where I had last seen Sarah. The attic was dark and dusty, but as I stepped inside, I felt a familiar presence. It was Sarah, standing by the window, her figure bathed in the soft moonlight. "You're back," she said, her voice barely audible. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "I wanted to see if you were still here." Sarah smiled. "I've been waiting for you. I knew you would return." We talked for hours, catching up on our lives. Sarah told me that she had found peace after our last encounter. She had moved on to a higher realm, but she had always felt a connection to me. As the moon began to set, Sarah turned to me. "Thank you for everything," she said. "You gave me hope when I thought all was lost." With a final smile, Sarah faded away, leaving me alone in the attic. As I descended the stairs, I felt a sense of peace and closure. My journey with the vanishing hitchhiker had come full circle, and I knew that I would never forget her.